Wow. Wow. Cambridgeshire's children are the best. Did you notice, everybody? All I had to do was this, and then look what happened. Everybody copied and everybody was quiet. Good morning, everybody. Good morning, everybody. Good morning to everybody that is here in the Lady Mitchell Hall. And good morning to all those children who are perhaps sitting in their classrooms or perhaps in the hall who are having assembly at this morning. We can't see you, but we hope that you can see us all gathered together for a very, very special event. It is really lovely to welcome everybody. Great to see all the grown-ups that have helped this morning, getting the children through the Cambridge traffic perhaps, and great to see the whole array of different coloured uniforms, because it tells me that we've got schools from all across Cambridge all gathered in one place for a very important and very, very exciting literary event this morning. So I'm just going to look and then we're just going to have a bit of a wave. So I'm going to say good morning to St. Albans. St. Albans, look, there's St. Albans. And good morning, and let's see, St. Albans. St. Albans, we have one of your representatives over here. So this is Jack, and Jack is going to be one of our representatives on the sofa this morning. And good morning also to Fawcett Primary School. Where's Fawcett Primary School? Lovely, lovely Fawcett Primary School. Really love that purple. How exciting. Purple and green, beautiful. And Fawcett, we have your representative, and this is Chris on the sofa this morning. And I know that we've also got Thorndown. Here's Thorndown. Thorndown were ever so eager. You were in at sort of 6:30 this morning. They were camping outside on the outside here. But and it was actually this young man, Kyle. You were the first person in this morning, and Evie is your representative over here. And we have the Spinney Primary School over there. And if I haven't mentioned your school, we are really pleased that you're here. So everybody else, give us a wave. So oh, look at that. That's lovely. Can we see that? That's beautiful. Right, well, my name is Rachel Snape, and I'm the head teacher of the Spinney Primary School. And I was really, really lucky because I had a great opportunity to work with lots of people that have helped to create this very exciting event that's the first of its kind, certainly in Cambridgeshire, and possibly the first of its kind in the world. But I haven't checked that out. And it's a wonderful collaborative event between Cambridge Literary Festival, Cambridgeshire County Council, the Kite Teaching School Alliance, which is a group of lovely schools that are all working together, and Cambridgeshire Libraries and Archives. And I have a very great pleasure in introducing the first big read and write for Cambridgeshire, but an even more exciting opportunity to say a hello and to welcome and also to introduce Cathy Moore, who is the director of Cambridge Literary Festival. So good morning, Cathy. Thank you very, very much for all your help in organising this truly exciting event.
It is. It's an absolutely thrilling event. I'm delighted to be part of this pilot, the Big Read and Write. We hope it will be the first of many, and it would be really exciting if it was the first in the whole world, and we will check that one out and get back to you. I've got a really wonderful job right now, which is to introduce our very, very special guest. And for the first ever Big Read and Write, we had to have somebody really, really special. And we have got Francesca Simon for you here this morning. And Francesca is a very busy person. Francesca has written over 50 books for children in the last 25 years. Hands up if you know how many books a year that is. First hand up. On the sofa.
2.
Well done. So 2 books a year. And in between that, she squeezes in lots of events like this to talk to children about reading and writing. She judges writing competitions. She judges book prizes, including the Roald Dahl Funny Prize. She is altogether very busy. She's a big supporter of World Book Day and is a trustee for World Book Day.
I am.
She also writes books for older children, as well as the books we're going to be talking about in a little while. Her latest book for older children is called The Lost Gods. But Horrid Henry is what we're here to talk about today. Francesca was the creator of Horrid Henry and has been writing about him for 21 years. And, and the last Horrid Henry book is coming out in July, and it's called Horrid Henry's Cannibal Curse. So you should all look out for that in the shops in July. The format today is, we're very lucky in that Francesca has agreed to read one of her Horrid Henry stories for us, and then we're going to get an opportunity to ask some questions, because Francesca is a fantastic teacher of writing, so she's going to give you all some tips today. So you've all got a piece of paper, I think, so you can begin to think of your questions and write them down. We've got our panel on the sofa who can ask questions. All it remains for me to say is, can we give a very warm round of applause to welcome our guest, the fabulous Francesca Simon.
Thank you. Okay. Hi, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here today. So as part of the big read and write, I'm going to do the first part right now, which is the read. So I hope everyone is ready for a story, because today's story, and you will see why I've chosen this one, because I've written 96 Horrid Henry stories, and you'll see why I've chosen this one. This one is called Horrid Henry and the Zombie Vampire. All right, is everybody ready for a really scary story? Okay, sit up straight, get your ears out, and listen. Horrid Henry and the Zombie Vampire. "Isn't it exciting, Henry?" said Perfect Peter, packing bunnykins carefully in his Sammy the Snail overnight bag. "A museum sleepover with a torchlit trail and worksheets. I can't think of anything more fun." "I can," snarled Horrid Henry. "Being trapped in a cave with Clever Claire reciting all the multiplication tables from 1 to 1,000,000. Watching Cooking Cuties. Even visiting Nurse Needle for one of her horrible injections. Well, maybe not that. But almost anything would be better than being stuck overnight in our town museum on a class sleepover. No TV, no computers, no comics. Why, oh why did he have to do this? He wanted to sleep in his own comfy bed, not in a sleeping bag on the museum's cold, hard floor, surrounded by photos of old mayors and a few dusty exhibits. It's not exactly the Fitzwilliam, is it? Ah! Wasn't it bad enough he was bored all day in school without being bored all night, too? Worse, Peter's nappy baby class was coming, too. They'd probably have to be tucked in at 7 o'clock when they'd all start crying for their mamas. Ugh. And then Miss Battleaxe snarling at them to finish their worksheets, and Moody Margaret snoring, and anxious Andrew whimpering that he'd seen a ghost. Well, no way was he going to that boring old dump without some comics to pass the time. He just bought the latest Screamin' Demon with a big article all about vampires and zombies. Yay! He couldn't wait to read it. Perfect Peter watched him stuff his Mutant Max bag full of comics. "Henry, you know we're not allowed to bring comics to the museum sleepover," said Perfect Peter. "Shut up and mind your own business, Toad," said Horrid Henry. "Mom, Henry just called me a toad," wailed Peter. "And he told me to shut up." Toady, 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 jeered Henry. Henry, stop being horrid or no museum sleepover for you, yelled Mum. Horrid Henry paused. Was it too late to be horrid enough to get banned from the sleepover? Why hadn't he thought of this before? Why he could... Henry, Peter, we have to leave now, yelled Dad. Rats. The children queued up in the museum's central hall, clutching their sleeping bags as Miss Lovely and Miss Battleaxe ticked off names on a big register. Go away, Susan, said Moody Margaret. After what you did at my house, I'm going to sit with Gurinder. So there. You're such a meanie, Margaret, said Sour Susan. Am not, are too. Susan scowled. Margaret was always so mean. If only she could think of a way to pay that old grouch back. Margaret scowled. Susan was always so annoying. If only she could think of a way to pay that old fraidy cat back. Henry scowled. Why did he have to be here? What he'd give for a magic carpet to whisk him straight home to the comfy black chair to watch Terminator Gladiator. Could life get any worse? Henry, came a little voice next to him. I love you, Henry. I want to give you a big kiss. Oh no, thought Horrid Henry. Oh no, it was lisping Lily, New Nick's little sister. What was that foul fiend doing here? You keep away from me, said Horrid Henry, pushing and shoving his way through the children to escape her. Wah, wailed Weepy William as Henry stepped on his foot. I want my mama, cried Needy Neal as Henry trampled on his sleeping bag. But I want to Maui with you, Henry, lisped Lily, trying to follow him. Henry, stay still, barked Miss Battleaxe, glaring at him with her demon eyes. Hello, boys and girls, what an adventure we're going to have tonight, said the museum's guide, Ernest Ella, as she handed out pencils and worksheets. Henry groaned. Boring. He hated worksheets. Did you know that our museum has a famous collection of balls of wool through the ages? Droned Ernest Ella. And an old railway car. Oh, yes, it's going to be an exciting sleepover tonight. We're even going on a torchlit walk through the corridors. Horrid Henry yawned and sneaked a peek at his comic book, which he'd hidden beneath his museum worksheet. Watch out, demon fans. To celebrate the release of this season's big blockbuster monster horror film, The Zombie Vampires. Study this checklist. Make sure there are no zombie vampires lurking in your neighborhood. Horrid Henry gasped as he read how to recognize a vampire and how to recognize a zombie. Big scary teeth, big googly eyes, looks like the Walking Dead. Wow, that described Miss Battleaxe perfectly. All they had to add was big fat carrot nose, and a dark shadow loomed over him. I'll take that, snapped Miss Battleaxe, yanking the comic out of his hand. And the rest. Huh? He'd been so careful. How had she spotted that comic under his worksheet? And how did she know about the secret comic book stash in his bag? Horrid Henry looked round the hall. Aha! There was Peter pretending not to look at him. How dare that wormy worm toad tell on him? Just for that. Come along, everyone, line up to collect your torches for our spooky walk, said Ernest Ella. You wouldn't want to get left behind in the dark, would you? There was no time to lose. Horrid Henry slipped over to Peter's class and joined him in line with Tidy Ted and Goody Goody Gordon. Hello, Peter, said Henry sweetly. Peter looked at him nervously. Did Henry suspect he'd told on him? Henry didn't look angry. Shame my comic got confiscated, said Henry, 'cause it had a list of how to tell whether anyone you know is a zombie vampire. A zombie vampire, said Tidy Ted. Yup, said Henry. They're imaginary, said Goody Goody Gordon. That's what they'd like you to believe, said Henry, but I've discovered some. Where, said Ted. Horrid Henry looked round dramatically, then dropped his voice to a whisper. 2 teachers at our school, hissed Henry. 2 teachers, said Peter. What, said Ted. You heard me. Zombie vampires. Miss Battleaxe and Miss Lovely. Miss Lovely? Gasped Peter. You're just making that up, said Gordon. It was all in Screamin' Demon, said Henry. That's why Miss Battleaxe snatched the comic, to stop me finding out the truth. Listen carefully. Horrid Henry recited, how to recognize a vampire. 1, big, huge, scary teeth. If Miss Battleaxe's fangs were any bigger, she'd trip over them, said Horrid Henry. Tidy Ted nodded. She does have big, pointy teeth. That doesn't prove anything, said Peter. Number 2, drinks blood. Perfect Peter shook his head. Drinks blood? Obviously they do, just not in front of people, said Horrid Henry. That would give away their terrible secret. 3, only appears at night. But Henry, said Goody Goody Gordon, we see Miss Battleaxe and Miss Lovely every day at school. They can't be vampires. Henry sighed. Have you been paying attention? I didn't say they were vampires. I said they were zombie vampires. Being half zombies lets them walk about in daylight. Perfect Peter and Goody Goody Gordon looked at one another. Here's the total proof, said Henry. How to recognize a zombie. 1, looks dead. Does Miss Battleaxe look dead? Definitely, said Horrid Henry. I never saw a more dead-looking person. But Henry, said Peter, she's alive. Unfortunately, thought Horrid Henry. Duh, he said. Zombies always seem alive. Plus, zombies have got scary, bulging eyes like Miss Battleaxe, and they feed on human flesh. Miss Lovely doesn't eat human flesh, said Peter. She's a vegetarian. A likely story, said Henry. You're just trying to scare us, said Peter. Don't you see? They're planning to pounce on us during the torchlit trail. I don't believe you, said Peter. Henry shrugged. Fine, don't believe me. Just don't say I didn't warn you when Miss Lovely lurches out of the dark and bites you, he shrieked. Be quiet, Henry, shouted Miss Battleaxe. William, stop weeping. There's nothing to be scared of. Linda, stand up. It's not bedtime yet. Bert, where's your torch? I don't know, said Beefy Bert. Miss Lovely walked over and smiled at Peter. Looking forward to the torchlit walk, she beamed. Peter couldn't stop himself sneaking a peek at her teeth. Were they big and sharp? Funny, he'd never noticed before how pointy 2 of them were. And was her face a bit, pale? No! Henry was just trying to trick him. Well, he wasn't going to be fooled. Time to go exploring, said Ernest Ella. First stop on the torchlit trail, our brand new exhibit, Wonderful World of Wool. Then we'll be popping next door down the passage to the past to visit the old railway car and the Victorian shop and a Neanderthal cave. Torches, everyone. Sour Susan smiled to herself. She just thought of the perfect revenge on Margaret for teasing her for being such a scaredy cat. Moody Margaret smiled to herself. She just thought of the perfect revenge on Susan for being so sour. Ha ha, Margaret, thought Susan, I'll get you tonight. Ha ha, Susan, thought Margaret, I'll get you tonight. Ha ha, Peter, thought Henry, I'll get you tonight. Follow me, said Ernest Ella. The children stampeded after her, all except 3. When the coast was clear, Moody Margaret turned off her torch, darted into the pitch-black passage to the past hall, and hid in the Neanderthal cave behind the caveman. She'd leap out at Susan when she walked past. Mwahahahaha. Can you all try that? 1, 2, 3. Wouldn't that old scaredy cat get a fright? Sour Susan turned off her torch and peeked down the passage to the past corridor. Empty. She tiptoed to the railway car and crept inside. Just wait till Margaret walked past. Horrid Henry turned off his torch, crept down the passage to the past, sneaked into the Victorian shop, and hid behind the rocking chair. Tee! Just wait till Peter walked past. What was that? Was it his imagination? Or did that spinning wheel in the corner of the shop move? Creak! Went the wheel. It was so dark. But Henry didn't dare switch on his torch. Moody Margaret looked over from the Neanderthal cave at the Victorian shop. Was it her imagination, or was that rocking chair rocking back and forth? Sour Susan looked out from the railway car. Was it her imagination, or was the caveman moving? There was a strange scuttling noise. What was that, thought Susan. You know, thought Henry, this museum is kind of creepy at night. And then something grabbed onto his leg. Ah! Screamed Horrid Henry. Moody Margaret heard a blood-curdling scream. Scarcely daring to breathe, Margaret peeped over the caveman's shoulder. Sour Susan heard a blood-curdling scream. Scarcely daring to breathe, Susan peeked out from the railway carriage. Henry, I found you, Henry, piped the creature clinging to his leg. Go away, Lily, hissed Henry. That horrible fiend was going to ruin everything. Will you marry me, Henry? No, said Horrid Henry, trying to shake her off and brushing against the spinning wheel. Creak! Can you all do the spinning wheel? 1, 2, 3. Ooh, the spinning wheel spun. What's that noise, thought Margaret, craning to see from behind the caveman. Henry, I want to give you a big kiss, lisped Lily. Horrid Henry shook his leg harder. The spinning wheel tottered and fell over. Crash! Margaret and Susan saw something lurch out of the Victorian shop and loom up in the darkness. A monstrous creature with 4 legs and waving arms. Ah! Screamed Susan. Ah! Screamed Margaret. 1, 2, 3. Ah! Shrieked Henry. The unearthly screams rang through the museum. Peter, Ted, and Gordon froze. You don't think, gasped Gordon. Not, trembled Peter. Zombie vampires, whispered Ted. They clutched one another. Everyone back to the central hall now, shouted Ernest Ella. In the cafeteria, Miss Lovely and Miss Battleaxe were snatching a short break to enjoy a lovely fried egg sandwich with lashings of ketchup. Oh, my weary bones, thought Miss Battleaxe as she sank her teeth into the sandwich. Peace at last. Ah! Eat! Help! Miss Battleaxe and Miss Lovely squeezed their sandwiches in shock as they heard the terrible screams. Splat! A stream of ketchup squirted Miss Lovely in the eye and dripped down her face onto her blouse. Squirt! A blob of ketchup splattered Miss Battleaxe on the nose and dribbled down her chin onto her cardigan. Sorry, Boudica, said Miss Lovely. Sorry, Lydia, said Miss Battleaxe. They raced into the dark central hall just as their classes ran back from the walk. 50 beams of light from 50 torches lit up the teachers' ketchup-covered faces and ketchup-stained clothes. Ah! Screamed Perfect Peter. It's the zombie vampires, howled Tidy Ted. Run for your lives, yelped Goody Goody Gordon. Wait, shouted Miss Lovely. Children, come back. We won't eat you, shouted Miss Battleaxe. Ah! The end.
Thank
Thank you. It was fantastic and wonderful to see so many rapt faces. Now is question time, and we're going to take a question from the sofa, first of all.
Yes, I think Evie's got the very first question.
Does Eve...
We need to remind everybody about microphone etiquette,
Yes.
which is just wait for the microphone. If you're being asked to do a question, if you get invited to do a question, just wait until the microphone is right next to you before you ask your question. Off you go, Evie.
Do you have a special time or a special routine for writing?
That's an excellent question. Thanks, Evie. Do I have a special time, a special routine for writing? Yes and no. I write in my office, which is at the very top of my house. I live in a terraced Victorian house, so I work on the 3rd floor. And I usually write best in the morning. So I always try to get a cup of coffee, go up to my desk, sit down. But I get ideas everywhere. But I do go up and write every day. I always try to write a certain number of words every day. But I always have to have notebooks and bits of paper with me because I never know when I'm going to get a really good idea.
Does that answer your question?
I think
Is that, yes. We've got a blue
question.
Is Horrid Henry based on a real character?
Is Horrid Henry based on a real character? Not specifically. I was really thinking about the fact that everybody in the world has like a good side and a bad side, that everybody in the world has the side of them that wants to be really good and sit up straight, and then also has that side that really wants to reach in front and yank on the person's hair in front of them, and that kind of war between the two. So I sort of chopped a perfectly ordinary person in half, and then I got Horrid Henry and Perfect Peter. So not really. He's a little bit based on me because I was really, really good in school. You would have never seen a better behaved person than me in school. I never talked out of turn. I always did my homework. I always raised my hand. And then the moment I got home from school, yelling and screaming and slamming doors. So I think people can have both characters inside them.
Yeah, it is. It's hard to be nice all day, isn't it?
It is.
It's really hard. Another question from the sofa. What your name is? Yekapu. Yekapo. Would you like to read your question?
What job do you imagine Horrid Henry will do when he grows up?
What do I imagine Horrid Henry will do when he grows up? That is actually an impossible question for me to answer because I never think of him as a grown-up. I always think of him as being, about 8 or 9. It's really hard to say. Do you have an idea for what he might be doing when he's a grown-up? No? He'll either be prime minister or a dictator and rule the world. What he would like to be is a dictator and rule the whole world. Because he thinks the world would be perfect if everyone just did everything that he wanted them to.
Thank you. I think somebody should have a yellow microphone down there. Hello?
Why did you use alliteration for their names?
Ooh, a very good Cambridge question. Why did I use alliteration? Well, I absolutely love alliteration because when I came to this country, I came to Oxford and I studied a very, very useful subject called Anglo-Saxon, Old English. A subject that I'm sure that's one of those subjects that's guaranteed to lead to a good job and lifetime employment. No, it's the study of Old English, and there were only 7 of us who were doing it. But it was a really interesting course. And one of the things about Old English is that alliteration rather than rhyme is really important. And English as a language works very well with alliteration. And it was just, I've always enjoyed alliterating. And I came up with the idea really because I tend to think alliteratively. So the way I do the characters is I think of horrible adjectives like sour or rude or horrid, and then I put a name with that adjective that alliterates. Because it's just a lot of fun to do.
Thank you. Another question from the sofa. And what's your name?
Chris.
Hello, Chris. Would you like to read your question?
Who is your favourite author and what book are you reading now?
These are such good questions. My favorite author for children or for adults?
Yes, adults.
Okay, well, my favorite author actually is a Victorian writer named Anthony Trollope, who used to write books that are about this thick, and he wrote loads of them. He is probably my favorite author, but my favorite author for children is somebody called Edward Eager, who wrote lots of books about magic and children finding magic coins, and I always loved the idea of magic happening to ordinary people. I was never very interested, and I'm still not, in magic happening to, you know, wizards and things like that, but I always liked the idea of just an ordinary person walking down the road and finding a magic coin. And the book that I am reading now, well, interesting, I've just finished reading 5 Children and It by E. Nesbitt, a really wonderful book. And I'm reading a book called Washington Square by Henry James, which I'm really enjoying because it's a book I haven't read in a very, very long time.
Thank you. Those are really good questions. And somebody should have a blue microphone. Off you go.
In your opinion, what is the worst thing Henry could do?
In my opinion, what's the worst thing at Henry? Well, he's done so many bad things. I think a particularly bad one, which is actually based on a true story, is when Horrid Henry tricks Peter into going outside at midnight and climbing a tree, because Henry tells him that there's fairies dancing at the bottom of the tree. And I actually know somebody who tricked their brother into climbing a tree at midnight. He didn't tell them there were fairies, but he suggested they go outside and climb a tree at midnight. And his little brother did it, and then he left him outside in the tree. And then he sneaked back into the house and pretended to be asleep. And then so his parents came in, and his little brother started screaming and yelling, and the parents ran out, and the little brother said, you know, Wilf made me do it. And then Wilf was pretending to be asleep, but Wilf forgot one thing. He didn't check his pajamas, and there were leaves and twigs attached. So he got into big trouble. But the funny thing about this story is that Wilf grew up to be a teacher. And he told me that he had just been reading this story to his class, and he'd completely forgotten that he was the one who had told me this story and that it was him. He had sort of rewritten history. But that was a really bad thing, and I loved that story. The other story I really like is Horrid Henry robs the bank when he sneaks next door to Moody Margaret's house and steals all the money from her Monopoly set, and then goes back to his house where they're playing, and then he suddenly has all this money in the bank. That's a pretty bad one, too. There's endless ones.
Our final sofa question. And what's your name?
Whitechie.
Pardon?
Whitechie.
Whitechie. Would you like to read your question?
What is your favourite saying or quote?
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
My favorite saying or quote. And you know, I've never been asked that question. This is, well, my son always says that my favorite saying is, I've got just the right cream. Because whenever he was little and whatever was wrong with him, I would say, don't worry, I have just the right cream. And I would get out some cream. So whatever was wrong with him, I would always have some magic lotion to put on him. So he said, oh, you have, Mummy, do you have just the right cream? I'd say, I do, Josh, I do. But I don't know if that's sort of my favorite at-home saying. And I'm sure I must have others that I think about. Oh, yes, I do have one, a more grown-up one. And that's something I like to say. I like to say, if something is working out really well, I go, oh, it's writing itself. Because I think that's what all writers would like, is that it's just writing itself by magic.
Yeah. That's
So you got two sayings for the price of one.
Yeah, that's a good.
And that's a great question. I've never been asked that.
No, it is a good one. Actually, a journalist friend of mine said that. Said just keep on writing, and eventually you'll have something.
Well, I like it's writing itself, that you don't have to do anything.
Yeah, it's very good. And you mentioned, sorry, I'm going to sneak in with a question here.
Yes.
You mentioned your son Josh,
Yes.
and it's right that no coincidence that Josh is probably early 20s, and you began writing Horrid Henry books 21 years ago?
Well, Josh actually, who went to Cambridge, in fact, I started writing Horrid Henry when Josh was 3, so he was too little. And people always ask, is Horrid Henry based on Josh? Not really. Horrid Henry is, Josh is probably, even though, because he's not here, so I can say this, some of the things that are in Horrid Henry books are things that happened to Josh. Like, for example, Josh is a vegetarian, so I always like to put in vegetable jokes, because Josh was a vegetarian who hated vegetables, which was a bit difficult. And things like Horrid Henry when he lost a tooth, because Josh was the youngest in his year, because he's an August child. So things like when Horrid Henry hasn't lost a tooth, that was Josh, because he'd come home and say, everybody's lost a tooth but me. And he'd be really upset about it. So he isn't Horrid Henry, but the incidents are based around his life, like birthday parties and school fairs and things like that.
Good material.
Good material, yes.
There should be somebody else holding a yellow microphone. Hello.
How many books have you wrote?
How many books have I written? Well, I've lost count. I've written 24 Horrid Henry books. So Horrid Henry's Cannibal Curse will be the 24th book. But I write lots of other books. I've written these older books, which are based around Norse mythology, called The Sleeping Army and The Lost Gods. But I've written picture books. So I always say over 50, because it's probably now 60 books. That's a lot.
It's not bad. Has somebody got a blue microphone?
How old were you when you first wrote your? How old were you when you wrote your first book?
Well, I was 8 years old when I wrote my first book, but I was in my 30s when my first book was published. That's why I always say you're never too young to start writing. But I wrote the bad thing about my writing when I was 8 is I wrote lots of stories, but I never finished them. You must always finish your stories. Always, always, always. Rule number 1 of writing. Don't leave all those unfinished stories lying about. So I've been writing ever since I was 8.
Wow, well, that's inspiration for all of you. We're now going to have some questions, I think, from our schools who are watching in live.
Yes, we have several schools watching online, and they've been sending in questions via the hashtag #BigReadAndWrite. And there are 2 personal favourites of mine so far, if that's okay.
Sure.
The first one is, how neat is your handwriting?
That is an excellent question. How neat is my handwriting? I'm loving all these questions I've never been asked in my life. I used to have absolutely exquisite handwriting because I lived in France for a while when I was a child. And when I lived in France, we had to write, if you can believe this, with a pen dipped in an inkwell. Yes. And it's very difficult to write with a pen dipped in an inkwell. And the main problem is that you get blots everywhere. But I had to learn to write these very delicate letters. Okay, so I had great, and then I went back to California where I'm from, and they didn't believe children could handwrite. So they insisted that I print on big pieces of paper. I've never learned how to print because I went straight to doing exquisite handwriting. And then they said, no, you can't handwrite, you must print. So my handwriting went from being gorgeous and wonderful to being big and scrawly. So it's now it's okay. You can read it. But when I think about my beautiful handwriting at 8, it makes me sad. And I blame my teacher in California for being so ridiculous, making me print.
So it doesn't need to be perfect.
Your handwriting doesn't need to be perfect? Well, it's nice to write so other people can read what you've written. My son's writing, I can't read it. So I don't know how he managed to do so well in exams. Maybe they just gave him A's because they couldn't read a thing he wrote.
That's another tactic.
And one more, if that's okay? Mm-hmm. If you could time travel, when and where would you go?
As long as I could bring my dentist with me, I would probably go to I'll go to 2 places. I'd like to go to Victorian England, and I would also like to go to the time of the Vikings.
Excellent.
Because I love Iceland, and I'm really interested in that time period.
Do you see yourself as a Viking?
No, though I do look quite good in a Viking hat. I have tried one on.
Thank you.
Great. Good questions out there.
Wonderful. Well, I think we should give Francesca Simon a really big round of applause. Thank you very, very much. And thank you also to Kathy for chairing so beautifully. And some really fantastic questions. Well done, Cambridgeshire Schools. I think that says such a lot about what teachers and schools are doing to inspire our young people, that Francesca had some questions there that she'd never been asked before. So can we just give a round of applause to our young panellists and the people who asked questions. Well done everybody for your lovely questions. Well, Francesca said that she was going to start with the big read, and we've had a fantastic big read. I'm just trying to wonder about all those teachers who are watching, whether they relate to themselves as Miss Battleaxe or Miss Lovely, and I'm a bit worried about that myself. So we've certainly had... It's laughing now. We've certainly had a wonderful big read. Thank you very much indeed. And now we are going to talk about how we are all going to get involved in the big write. So, everybody in the hall, when you leave here, your teachers and you are going to collect a form. I daren't say worksheet now, because we know what Horrid Henry thinks about worksheets.
I love worksheets.
Oh, you love
myself.
worksheets.
Adore
good.
worksheets.
Oh my goodness, that's a good thing. So we have a worksheet, and Francesca Simon adores worksheets, so we're on to a good start. And we're going to ask you to collect your ideas for a big write, and the theme absolutely links with the story you've heard this morning. Because the theme for your big write that you are all going to do, if you would like to, you're invited to do this, is Horrid Henry Visits the Museum. Now, I've heard a really good idea there about if you start a story, keep going, don't stop until you finish your story. So that's one really good suggestion. But we've got an amazing author with us here this morning. So Francesca, have you got some other great ideas to inspire Cambridgeshire children to get involved in the big write?
I do, and that was why I chose that particular story. So you can see how I chose to use a museum story. But first of all, your story doesn't have to involve Horrid Henry. But when you're thinking about all the ways that you could use the theme about going to a museum, just think of ask yourself a lot of questions, which is always how I write. So for example, think about what a museum is. I chose a silly museum, our town museum, which has things like balls of wool in it. So I chose really boring things in this museum. But think about your local museum, the Fitzwilliam, or any of the wonderful museums in Cambridge. These are just ideas. In a museum, you could step into a picture. You could have all the statues come alive. You could hide in a museum and see what happened. A museum is like a doorway to the past. You could time travel in the museum. A museum could be a secret world where there's different creatures who live in the museum who only come out at night. Horrid Henry used the museum as a trick. So how could you play a trick on someone in a museum? A museum sleepover. These are just a few of the ways you could use a museum as a location. But think about, when you write your story, who your character is, why they're in the museum, what happens to them, and also how are things different at the end from the beginning? Because one of the little tricks that writers use that your teachers don't necessarily tell you is, you do not have to write a story beginning, middle, end. You can write a story end, beginning, middle if you want. And just think about the middle as the twist, what happens at the end. And if you think about your story and what happens at the end, it's often easier to get there. But you've seen how I've used the museum theme. Use it in any way you want. Is it an exciting museum? Is it a boring museum? What is it a museum of? You can have a museum of absolutely, and it could be a museum of school uniforms. It could be a museum of glasses. It could be a museum of paintings. It can be a museum of anything. So it's a really open topic, and I've used it as a sleepover, but I've just given you 8 different possible ways you could do it for yourself, and there's easily 30, 40, 50 more. So think about all the different ways you could use the museum and get writing and finish your stories.
Thank you very much. So we're really inspired now to go back to our schools and perhaps try to put together some great ideas based on the ones that you've just heard, or your own ideas. And that's the exciting thing, is that I can guarantee that no 2 stories will be exactly the same. And that's what makes story writing so unique. Collect your ideas, write your stories. This is open to everybody in Cambridgeshire. Then send them into the Spinney Primary School. We've got a group of judges who will gather together, and we're going to hopefully announce one winner on the 17th of April. We need your entries in by the 14th of April. If you want to take part, it's entirely up to you and your schools, but this is the offer. And a pack has gone to all of your schools explaining about this entire way of getting involved. The other thing I want to say is we've called it The Big Read. So you've heard Francesca Simon reading from Horrid Henry. We've introduced The Big Write, but actually we're even coming back to The Big Read again, because one of the partners that we've also mentioned is Cambridgeshire Libraries and Archives. And we've spoken to Cambridge Libraries and Archives, and they've absolutely said that if you go along to your local library, wherever it is, and go and ask and tell them what you've been doing, they will find some Horrid Henry books for you to borrow. Please do go along to your local libraries. If you haven't got a library card, do sign up. They know about this project and they're fully involved. The other thing to say is that when you leave here today, your teachers will be getting a copy of the, your teachers could write stories, couldn't they? So you're going to write a story, you're going to get a worksheet, and you're also going to be getting a very unique bookmark, the first of its kind, because this is the first time we've started this project. We're hoping to run it for a few more years. And you'll see it's The Big Read and Write, 2015, Horrid Henry by Francesca Simon. Everybody in this audience today is going to have a unique bookmark to remember this day. And there are also others. If you and your school would like some, please do let us know. Thank you very, very much for everybody who's coming. I'm going to now hand over to Amanda Ascombe from the County Council. Thank you, Amanda.
Thank you, Rachel. I'm Amanda from the County Council. I just want to say how excited and proud I am to be part of this first Big Read and Write event. The County Council has sponsored the event through our Cambridgeshire Culture Fund, and we hope we'll continue to support it for many years. So, like Perfect Pete, I have written my thank you letters, and I have a number of people that we can all thank. So, of course, the first is Francesca. That was a wonderful story. I think I've been on that school trip. And I know we all enjoyed it. Rachel and I were chortling in the corner, so thank you very much. Thank you very much to our panel on the sofas. Brilliant questions, and to all of you for your questions. So, shall we have a round of applause for Francesca, please? Hey. Thank you very much. The next people I have to thank are wonderful Rachel and wonderful Kathy, who brewed up this idea together over a shared love, literally over a shared love of reading and writing, came up with the idea and came to me to discuss it. So they have done a wonderful job in coming up with the idea. But like many people who have a good idea, we need some help to make it happen. So that's come from Mark and Susie and Anna. Thank you very much. We have some brilliant volunteers with us today who've helped to make today happen, and I hope I've got everybody here. Grace, Katie, Teresa, Anna, and Helen. Thank you very much to our volunteers. Then I have a list of people without whom we couldn't possibly have done this for various reasons. Venue Audio Visual are providing all the technology for today, the cameramen, the live streaming, and we'll make this available on YouTube afterwards for us, so thank you to them. Thank you to Jamie up in the technician's box from Lady Mitchell Hall. He's given us a voice through our microphones. Thank you very much to Abbey Meadows for their sofas. Couldn't have done it without those. And to Ollie and John from Atlas Gardens for moving the sofas. And the last person to thank here is Connor's dad, Chris, for the lovely bunting, which has cheered us up. So a big round of applause to those people.
The bunting. It is nice. These are very comfy.
And last, but definitely not least, are all the people who've watched today. So everybody that's in the hall today, staff and children from all the schools who've watched this live, give yourselves a huge round of applause. And if everybody could find a camera to wave at to say thank you very much to everybody who's watched this online or who will be watching on YouTube.
Wave at the camera.
Wave at a
everybody.
camera. And a big round of applause for them. Great. Thank you very much, everyone. See you all next year.
So thank you everyone for coming and see you all next year.